Good afternoon. I'm Sook-Jong, who's going to moderate this Žofín Conversations. It's a very short conversation, just for 30 minutes. And we have two gentlemen to speak. On my right side, we have Professor Jan Švejnar, who is a director of Center on Global Economic Governance at Columbia University, CEPA. And on my left side, I have a deputy minister from Taiwan, Shizhen Xu, and who is actually a doctoral degree in political science. Okay, and we are going to discuss a collapsing global order. This title is rather became a sort of cliche. We are talking about collapsing international order or global order, but we have many dimensions, right? And you are economists and who has followed the global economic governance. And some will say that we have still a kind of the global economic system, IMF and World Bank and WTO, and institutionally they are still very valid and very strong. So just this tit for tat trade war between USA and China has been exaggerated. Maybe they realize they are just hurting each other's economy, and trade war may stop early next year. And also some people say that even this technology war between two giants has been exaggerated because if you just look at the global economy of today, there is so much interdependency. So it is almost impossible to separate the US-led global economy versus China-led global economy. And it's very different from the Cold War past, the Soviet economic bloc versus American the Western bloc. So they say economically, this collapsing economic order may be exaggerated. At the same time, some people believe that the globalization has created so much negative backlash, and Britain is leaving European Union, so we are actually entering more new era based on economic nationalism. So how do you assess the economic order, whether it's collapsing or not? And if it's collapsing, can you provide the evidence? And if it's collapsing, what kind of new economic order are we entering, please?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So obviously at a day-to-day level, the system is working and one is not noticing too much of a difference from day to day. But once you take a perspective of, let's say, the last 3 decades, and this conference is about that, we see a huge difference, right? In the 1990s, basically, what looked like was convergence to one system, broadly defined, Western sort of liberal type democracy with a regulated market economy. China was privatizing to a significant extent, Russia also, and countries around in the region here. So it looked like that kind of a system in various modalities was going to be the system, right? So the bipolar system was over and a unipolar, if you want, diversified system was in. Last 10 years have changed a lot. So first of all, China has grown dramatically fast for a dramatically long, unexpectedly long period of time economically. So it's a major power. China nowadays accounts for about 16% of world's production, okay? Europe about 22%, US about 24%, and at the rate at which it's proceeding, China is basically going to be a similar size economic bloc. At the same time, we see that there is a very diverse evolution in terms of political system. The convergence politically has stopped, ceased. There is divergence going on. China decided to go much more of a centralized political system. Western democracies and the market system have received a major shock through the financial crisis, the recession which has followed, right? So suddenly, the Western model is nowhere as appealing as it used to be economically, right? Russia is very good at disrupting the political aspect of the system in virtually any country in the world that it wants to do so. And so what we see is that the system, which still seemingly has the institutions and so on working, is now much more polarized. And the question that is really relevant is, are we entering a period where there is a new bipolar system and the Chinese model of fast economic growth with much less liberal system may be appealing to quite a lot of strong men leaders in various countries, right? While the Western system has, due to the inability to maintain the rate of economic growth, and of course the more recent challenge provided by Donald Trump and the administration, together with possibly escalating trade war, could lead to a major polarization. And notice that also if there should be a real trend towards protectionism, okay, then for the developing countries, the model of an export-led growth, which was the main model of how poor countries become rich, may no longer be feasible, right? So in an extreme, it could lead to a total change, not just in the case of US, China, etc. And so this is really, the future is very uncertain and could go one way or the other depending on what the major powers will do. And Europe is a very interesting case, one of the largest economies, not very unified as yet politically, even economically it's still not fully unified. And so to speak, right now it's playing, if I exaggerate slightly, a role of an innocent bystander, but it may not be able to do that much longer if the trade war escalates. Then it will sooner or later may be asked to choose where it is. And so that is another uncertainty as to where will this larger bloc go. Will it split? Will it splinter when it's asked to take sides? So in a way, we understand what's going on. We have data. We understand the underlying dynamics. But the future is very uncertain.
Everybody is talking about future is uncertain, but nobody is suggesting certain model of a future economy. So I'll get back to you later, what is a China model versus what is a Western model. Okay, let's go back to Asia Pacific region. And the Deputy Minister Xu, you are from the region where the American presence has been very strong, right? The peace and prosperity of the Asia Pacific region has been based on very strong defense commitment from the USA, and they have managed the region based on hub and spoke model, right? The alliance relationship with Japan, South Korea, and Philippines, and of course Taiwan is very special to USA, and also the USA ties with Australia. However, if you look at the kind of changes, quote unquote, the retrenchment of America from the region, some people say it's a little bit exaggerated. Maybe President Trump approached the alliance based on transactional approach, maybe tactical, to get the financial support to let the US Army stay in the region. But somebody said maybe he may withdraw some US forces from the allied countries, as we have done in the President Trump withdrew the US armies from the northern part of Syria, and that has invited invasion from Turkey to the Syrian borders. So how do you see whether this American presence in the Asia-Pacific region has going to be changing, or is too much concern?
So I think you are talking mainly about military presence and geostrategic perspective. I don't see, from that perspective, I don't see US is retreating from the region. From the perspective of Taiwan, we are facing the everyday military threat from China, and merely in this year, we have witnessed 6 times of US battleship passing the Taiwan Straits. This is unprecedented in comparison with previous years. And also, there are also battleships from other countries also passing Taiwan Straits, including some European ones. And this is also unprecedented. So, from this perspective, I would say, not only US is not retreating from this region, other partners, other actors actually are joining the game, making the region more heated or more competitive strategically. Of course, I think a lot of these moves are responses to the assertive and aggressive postures made by China, not only across the Taiwan Straits, but also in the South China Sea and East China Sea, and further. So from that perspective, I think the Western Pacific and East Asia region has become strategically more competitive.
Okay. In actually America, in the previous Obama administration, there was a strategy called Pivot to Asia, right? And then there was no such regional strategy from Trump administration. But recently, they have been developing a kind of FOIP strategy and free and open Indo-Pacific strategy that was initially based on more military strategy. But now, if we read this year's report, they are talking about energy corporations and helping the infrastructure buildings and so forth. So I think there is a multiple dimension. However, it's more based on private sector initiative rather than the American government money. And also they are relying on the cooperation with India, Japan, and Australia, and so forth. However, when I ask questions to my Asian friends, they are more cautious. Okay, so we are going to support the FOIP strategy in the region. However, we don't want to be perceived we are taking the side of USA over China. So their position is sometimes not clear. And what do you think about this, the region's respond to the rising US-China competition? Are they pushing to us too much to take a side, either of a side, and that is not desirable to many Asian countries?
Sometimes I think the perception that countries are being forced to take side is a little bit paranoid. Because coming back to the Indo-Pacific strategy itself, actually it contains 3 pillars: security, economy, and governance, which is actually about values, liberal democratic values. So when we say, those countries say they're forced to take side, what aspects are they talking about? Economically, we have to say the Belt and Road Initiative that contains a lot of projects in different countries. Sometimes these projects are also based on loans that the funding actually comes from either Asian Development Bank or World Bank, not necessarily China's national bank, but also a lot of projects are provided by China's domestic national banks. And most of the time, these projects are carried out by the SOEs from China. And a lot of these projects actually turned out to have bad quality. Mm-hmm. Some of them are white elephant projects. And more importantly, from time to time, it leaves debt burden to those countries. But the money comes very easily. It's mm-hmm. cheap money, easy money, but there's a package. There's a long-term impact. Whereas Indo-Pacific strategy, like you said, the US government and its partners, including Japan, Australia, cannot provide grant money or government money immediately. It relies on private sector money, so it takes time. However, usually the quality of the projects are much better, more reliable, but takes longer time. So it's up to those countries which side they want to choose. No one is pushing a gun at their heads to make the decision. However, on the value aspect, I think it's every country's own responsibility to make a choice which position they would like to take. And again, no one is forcing any country to make that choice. It's up to their own people and their own government.
Thank you. Professor Švejnar, why we have to worry about so much of a BRI, of a Chinese initiative? From the perspective of developing countries, they need to build out infrastructure, they need money, they need investment from outside. But no country is willing to provide such a big, massive flow of investment. Why we have to concerned about the Chinese investment? Do you buy the argument of a debt trap of BRI?
I think that it really depends on the project, it depends on the country. The fact is that generally speaking, the Chinese projects come with fewer strings attached compared to the projects from the World Bank or private sector, where very often you have the OECD Convention on Anti-Corruption and so on. So the country has to fulfill many more conditions in order to get Western-type investment. The Chinese investment comes in easier and usually on terms that are more favorable. On the other hand, we have seen cases where the country gets indebted, cannot repay, and the creditor, in this case China or Chinese institution or enterprise, takes over, be it the port in Sri Lanka or some other cases in Africa. So there is obviously that element as well, and so one has to judge it case by case, because it really is case by case. It's interesting that in Europe, for instance, quite a few ports are being financed that way, be it Piraeus, now Trieste, in Portugal, even Rotterdam has Chinese investment in it. So very often key infrastructure projects are financed with the loans from China, one way or another.
You know, I read recently China is setting up the sort of international court inside China to deal with this kind of conflict derived from BRI and that kind of things. And there is a worry that China may write their own rules internationally. And is there a kind of initiative from World Bank and other the European countries to make China become a more responsible donor? I read, for example, from European cases, Europe is going to introduce certain regulations and trying to make Chinese investment to Central and Eastern European countries to be more accountable and more transparent. So is there any move from the global economic institutions such as World Bank?
Yeah. There always has been that. So the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, which is a private sector arm of the World Bank, always have had these rules and adjudication procedures. The World Trade Organization, of course, has its own adjudication procedure in case of disputes and so on. So those institutions are there, and yes, there is an attempt to make them be even more functional. The competition of the systems that we talked about earlier, and maybe I should stress that even more, that we are at a crossroads where there may be systemic competition. So, you know, like there was a systemic competition between the Soviet model and the Western model, there may be a systemic competition between a China-type model and a Western-type model, if you want. And so in that sense, the role of institutions is going to be important, and China is naturally pushing its own institutions because that is compatible with the model it has. And the question is to what extent it's going to be compatible broadly within the whole world, or to what extent, in fact, there is going to be a severe competition. And in a way, it depends whether the US-China conflict escalates and goes broader, or whether it stays at the level and perhaps even becomes contained.
Okay. And Deputy Minister Xu, you and I are from East Asia, where the quote-unquote developmental state model has been very successful in modernizing our countries, right? And then after the economic modernization and industrializations, we follow the steps of political liberalization, and Taiwan and South Korea became a consolidated democracy. Why China cannot follow that kind of steps? You know China well.
Well, when we talk about China, we have to distinguish between Chinese government and Chinese people. I think the current path that China is going through is a choice made by the Communist Party as a government. From the very beginning, I was a political scientist studying Chinese politics for many years. From the very beginning, I never assumed that the Chinese Communist Party is going to choose the similar path as Taiwan did. Because the way Chinese government develops its economy is what I call party-state capitalism. It's a capitalism allowing different economic actors to compete to a certain degree in the field that the party-state allows. However, the party-state at the same time makes sure that it has the upper hand and control over critical strategic sectors, and that can dominate the lower stream of the economy, and also at the same time, the state-owned enterprises played a very important role, not only in terms of controlling the critical sector of domestic economy, but also as a sector expanding to the world. Not to mention all those complaints that the United States government has been alleged to the Chinese economic behavior, like the theft of the property rights from other countries, and state subsidy to the enterprises, and or coerced transfer of technology. All these may happen in some other countries, but this is different because all these are organized systematically by the state. So this is the model of party-state capitalism that cannot be copied in other countries. So from the very beginning, I believe the Chinese Communist Party is choosing a totally different path, seemingly very similar, also pursuing, so to speak, market economy, but there is always an element of state control. So as a consequence, I'm not surprised that the liberal democracy is not an outcome.
Professor Spaniard, Chinese model has been characterized as state capitalism, right? That the role of a state in economic sphere is very conspicuous, and they have many state companies which enjoy the state subsidies to compete better in the southern markets. At the same time, we call Chinese model as an authoritarian capitalism because obviously it's based on one-party rule, and it doesn't have a kind of a liberal democracy model as a political system that has been usually combined to the capitalism, right? You think this model is sustainable and can be copied to other world?
So first, the sustainability. I think very few people expected China to be able to grow as fast economically for as long. It's been 40 years that China has grown at such a rapid rate that it basically went from a poor developing country to a country which a number of sectors is at the frontier, and in some cases it's making the frontier, right? Huawei being a good example of that. So it's no longer a developing country in the traditional sense. It has managed to do that with this particular, as you say, state capitalist or authoritarian, yet significantly market-based system, where the state ownership aspect is very important. So obviously that system has proved to be, at least for now, a workable one. Now, when you talk to the Chinese economists, you realize they do worry about the middle income trap, that country could stop growing and maybe go to a slow growth or a recession like Japan did over the last 30 years. So it is on their mind, and policymakers in China are worrying about it very much. But so far, they have really managed to maintain a fascinatingly fast rate of growth. The media often are full of headlines saying, slow down in China, right? But then you read it, it's from 6.5 to 6.4, or 6.2 to 6.1. It's still such a fast rate of growth. Even if you discount it and say it's only 5%, right? It's still just a huge challenge for the Western countries. So in that sense, it is true that number of policymakers and leaders who point to sort of wanting to have a more successful, perhaps strong authoritarian regime, see that as a possible model, right? If China can do it, why wouldn't we think that possibly we could do it, right? You have mild diversion. Singapore has had huge success, and it's a country which is a market economy, etc., but government has played a significant role, nowhere as strong as in China, but obviously there are degrees and different stages. So in that sense, I think it is becoming a model. And I would like to stress that also from a broader historical standpoint, we're seeing a rise of a new empire. This is becoming a new economic, political empire, right? And there is a more global sort of question. What happens to the existing powers when there is an inexorably growing, and for 40 years this has been the case, new political, economic power, right? And that's sort of the issue that's going to be dealt with here, and hopefully it's not a Thucydides trap.
Right. And some people say that we should worry less about the democracy, illiberal democracy of the Chinese model. We should worry more about the declining growth of the Chinese economy, because that is very, very detrimental to global economy. So I think it's very important for the rest of the world, especially for the leading countries, to engage with China for the better economic governance, for the sake of the world. I have only several minutes left, so let me invite some questions from the floor. You can raise your hand, and please. Do we have questions? No questions? Okay, if we don't, maybe I should wrap it up.
But can I answer your thing?
Sure.
I think that there is this political aspect and there is the economic aspect. If we, for the moment, hold the political aspect on the side and look at the economic, it's obviously the case that if big countries or economic units like China or the United States or Europe grow fast, it's beneficial for the whole world, right? So there is no doubt that, yes, China has been an important engine of growth for the whole world economy. The US, the second most important, the weaker one being Europe. So yes, in that sense, obviously it's beneficial. But then there is the question of the interaction between the authoritarian political system and the economic system.
Dr. Xu,
yes, I would like to echo that. I mean, it is a good thing that the Chinese economy can keep growing and also at the same time benefiting the rest of the world. However, we also have to be aware that the way Chinese grows its economy is paying a lot of cost. And who are paying the cost? Actually, it's Chinese people, including the environmental damage and the pollution and the low wage that has been sustained, and also the low cost of the land. All these, I think, has done a lot of damage to Chinese people themselves. This is first. Second, we must be aware that the way Chinese conduct its economy, particularly the SOEs in the global front, actually a lot of times it's not playing with a fair competition. A lot of this international bidding that the SOEs wins actually enjoys the subsidy from its national bank, and other countries cannot do that. The way Chinese government spends money, they don't have to be accountable to their taxpayers, but we do. So when we say China's economy keep growing can benefit the rest of the world, we have to be aware that there are people paying for the cost for that. And the rest of the world actually are also paying a cost for that because China is not playing fairly. So there is always this question whether we want China to keep growing like this, because the more it grows, the more damage it will cause to the international free trade economy.
Okay. Okay, so we discussed that the multiple dimension of global order, the economic governance, and some political and military challenges, and also this whether we should, how we can defend the democratic model from the alternative model, which is, we'll say, more authoritarian capitalist model. And I hope we can continue this kind of conversation to the future. And I'd like to thank Professor Švejnar and Deputy Minister Xu for speaking eloquently. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.